in case people play a different opening. Possibly black could do a move of e5. Can we still follow that same idea? Yes. Although I will recommend that you change it a little bit. Play it in respect to knight c3. Knight c3 guarantees a little bit of a more solid control around the center squares, which could further help us to acquire g3. And no matter what black does, we could do bishop to the g2 and instantaneously look out for development and control in the right way. If this happens, basically you can choose between knight f3 or even knight e2, depending on which one you'd prefer more. For example, in here, I believe that a move like knight e2 might be just a little more appropriate, for the simple reason that after we cast a short side, this specific structure, even though it is similar to the previous, actually has a slightly different vibe to it. White can still play h3, knight, king h2, f4, and f5, but the control of that light square bishop over the squares of e4 and d5 really takes away much of black's ability to advance in the center and pose any real threats. Of course, this has to be related to bishop to e6 and his ability to try and play with the d5 move, which we could eventually respond by moving our own bishop to the g5, exchanging the knight, and then continuing with your plan. But if you're ever worried about that, or you're just a fan of a more active play, knight f3 is totally alright. In this particular case, d5 just becomes very difficult for black, and yet that knight doesn't have to worry itself, because wherever black goes and develops, this knight has the ability to go to h4. And most importantly, it's not going to just stay there. What you realize is that the knight is now going up to the f5 spot. Imagine, for instance, black playing a move of bishop to the e6. Then we could very easily play ahead with the move of knight f5. It's closer, it's steady. If black exchanges it, we're going to open up the bishop. Or you could even be more careful in that sense and simply go by playing h3. I love moves like that. h3, queen d7, king h2. The ability to reach out for f5 is within one moved line. But more importantly, what is great is just the way. It is the way we set it all up. It is the way we realize all the pieces and how a knight f5 just goes. It's terrific. What can we say about black in this position? Very little. That's the truth. It's d5 as a possibility at all times, but then our ability to counter it with moves like bishop g5 that intend to exchange an f6 and take away the center control. This is in fact one of the main reasons why when people play that line, they try to, complicate things a little bit more. Yet remember that this is why you need to decide the order. If you're playing against black, he'll never want you to get into these structures that easily. I mean, of course, that is when he knows what he's doing. So in most of the times, he's going to try to play a move like knight f6, bring out the d5, and really reach out for more. In that particular case, you have to know that, a formation of g3 could allow that d5, but don't worry about it. d5 isn't as dangerous as it sounds. It may give black a little bit of possibilities in the center, and surely it will give his knight the chance to just fit well. But it's totally okay. For example, after knight takes d5, white can play bishop g2. We can even let black to exchange on c3 or protect, because in the end of the day, white is just going to castle, and he's intending to prep himself forward with rook e1. We're going to have a nice attack against e5, and we're going to have a great opportunity to go ahead with rook e1, f6, and possibly d4. Remember that white's abilities are mostly possible and there because of the way on how the pieces are developed and well engaging, and black's own resources are fairly limited in that sense. It is white who starts first, and it is white who usually is supposed to have the initiative. Hence, the sequence itself just proves itself more helpful for white in many of the times. Now, the favorite order on how I like this King Scythian attack setup working is when people play e6. The French is what a lot of times is possible for black. Now, against that, we can just go d3. And what's so important about the d3 is that after d5, knight d2, we allow ourselves a chance to save the queens in case black ever decides to exchange. You have to understand that in order to avoid getting into a specific structure that he doesn't like, black is always having the condition to exchange. Trading off means that in case white takes back with the pawn, he can just do a move like e5 and open up some of his pieces. But you don't really have to worry too much about it. The whole idea with black just opening up the position and doing this means nothing special. Why is that? Well, first of all, it is definitely because when black plays with the move of pawn up to the e5, just everything seems to fit. White can do knight f3, and then after knight to the c6, there is c3 or bishop b5. I really like the idea of playing g3, bishop g2, but in this particular case, I simply see no purpose for that, no reason. There is no reason why we would ever like to move the bishop out there when this has a much more of a capable position going up to the square of the b5. And there is more to that. This is just a little bit of a hint as to what is expected. Keep in mind that opening the d file does not necessarily give black anything, especially when he's so far behind and back in his development, the pieces that he would like to have or utilize, and everything else. Should black choose to play with the move of maybe knight to the f6, that also means nothing, because white can play bishop to the b5, pinning down, castle, and in many occasions this whole opening sequence really leads to very much the same idea. Thinking about it that way, you realize what the whole idea is. The whole idea that white is having is nothing else but a simple plan to arrange the pieces and bring them closer to the king side once more. And the d file, despite it looking good and fairly useful, just doesn't really mean anything. Queen u2, rook d1, we put the knight around through the g3, and we still fight for the f5 square and the whole attack and everything that's going out from this. You see, I love positions or sequences of that kind. Not generally because they look good. I mean, they do. But what they do, most importantly, is that they have strength. They allow us to just, really build and set out the rest of our pieces on strong positions, making, therefore, our play incredibly helpful and great. What goes on stays on as soon as white's knight and the rest of his pieces really reach black at this point. We could see that knight f1 simply sets up very normally everything that white's going to do in that area. And while black certainly has the difficulties with the d file, with his development, and you name it, white doesn't. In fact, white is being fairly good here. Everything just works well. He is decent. And then after knight f1, queen c8, there's also always the knight g3. Just don't allow your opponent to do anything that may take you off guard or off the main plan. The main plan of action is all about the chance to keep the opponent a little behind. And so with that in mind, you realize, okay, it's not just white advancing very quickly on the king's side, it's also black feeling down a little bit on the backside when it comes down to white's ability to attack. And moves like bishop g5, knight f5, or even bishop takes the c6 are really working out in the most effective way possible. So overall, would I say that this is a line that requires a little more, investigation or consideration so that you can play it successfully? Of course. But, keep in mind that it's simple. And that's probably one of the most important things in any line if you want to make it work. See, you need it to be simple. The simpler it stands, the better it is going to be. And the better it is, well, I don't need to say why you need better lines. Simplicity in this particular case, plays a tremendous advantage over your opponent. Bishop e7, queen e2, rook e1, knight f1, and the slow build-up on the king's side progresses to much more. Now, what if black plays, for example, something like specific? Like, for instance, I've seen people do, say, the Scandinavian or the Alekhine. Apparently, in those type of positions, we can't quite reach the same type, can we? Well, you may or you may not. It really depends on how you decide to play it. My personal suggestion, is that you try to consider going for the e5. Because of the flexibility and control of the f-pawn, I think you don't have to worry regarding the fact that your pawn is on the e5. I believe that it is always a good idea when you have it there, especially when you can back it up and support it all that well. But seeing the position after c5, f4, knight c6, knight f3 reminds us of the opportunity to further on build with bishop b5, castle short side, and then of course other ideas going into place like maybe queen e1 towards g3. What's key is that this pawn on e5 creates a split inside black's position, not only by taking away the f6 square that you would usually want to control, but also it creates a split in the way he is developed, in the way his pieces are and feel, in everything that he is going to try to do or achieve, and yet he's not that capable of doing it. Let's take a look at some examples. For instance, in the position here, a lot of people would love to play a move of bishop f5 or even knight h6, a very popular way to go. In case of g3, which is my favorite move, people often do knight f5, and they even play h5 to stop that square from controlling. As a result, they also play e6 and then bishop to the d7. The plan behind it is that they prepare bishop e7, queen c7, and long side castles with the idea to plan up with g5, h4, and similar moves going into opposition on that side of the board. Interestingly enough, this almost seems to work, but there is a fundamental problem. Black tries to choose a formation or a structure of development without realizing that it's not nearly that possible. I mean, it's not that it's a bad idea for what black is doing. The problem, however, is that in this position, there is literally no way on how he is good in terms of this preparation or the setup for that. So, for instance, you could see after queen e2, for example, imagine queen c7, possibly a3, long side castles, and then b4. The schematic idea is that if black attempts to play f6 right now, there is going to be too much separation. His pieces from one side wouldn't be supporting the pieces from the other. Now, are there lines in which this move may work? Absolutely, there are. And I've seen even grandmasters play that line against me. I don't mean that this is terrible for black. Somebody who is very well versed in the deep, opening lines and this variation may argue or even defend the black position right there. I'm just saying that strategically you would have achieved more than you could hope for in an opening like this. Space, control, good development, and an easy way out for your pieces. You see, we don't need more than that in the opening. You don't need more. I don't need more. What you care about is, do I have what it takes so that I can have my comfortable position, continue to stay, and just remain being more powerful? And the answer to that is definitely yes. If the bishop goes down, white can play queen to the d3. He can prepare for knight d2, and possibly even developing and playing for c4. Black's intention with g5 almost always fails in those scenarios, simply because, well, it doesn't look like he's got the ability. It's going to be a rubber band type of, move that could really hold on only as much. And so you could see the lack of setup that right now black is having. Which is really why I definitely favor, this system as something that you can do. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm neither saying that you've got to necessarily consider this highly advantageous. I don't mean to do that. I don't want to do it. I merely suggest that if you're looking for a structure that gives you a clear idea and an opening with a specific plan and easy development, it is something that you might want to consider. Whether black plays e6, d5, e5, c5, or whatever, white's development always remains clear and concise, as his kingside development usually works out in a pretty straightforward way. And similarly to the king's union, which is one of the most popular openings for black, here you get to play with the tempo and an extra move that can help a brilliant kingside attack or center play, depending on how your opponent chooses to handle it. I hope you find this system useful, and remember, it's appropriate for every level, no matter if you're a beginner or a master.